Okay, so this is now part two for group two of episode 8 from America, the Story of Us. And this episode is about the boom, the economic boom. And this is now part two, which is going to begin with part 4 of their project, of the group's project. And these are pros and cons about Henry Ford, and this is Sabrina and Elena. Sabrina. Henry Ford was an American industrialist, the founder of the Ford Motor Company. He came from nothing, became an engineer, and after timeless experiments, finally, you know what? Timeless means forever. What we want to say is countless, actually. It means a lot. It's much better. All right. So he came from nothing, became an engineer, and after countless experiments, finally he developed and manufactured the first automobile that middle-class Americans could afford. Ford was a pioneer of welfare capitalism. He was credited with Fordism, mass production. Ford was a pioneer of welfare capitalism. He was credited with Fordism, mass production of inexpensive goods coupled with high wages for workers. Once again, mass production of inexpensive goods coupled with high wages for workers. He became the leader of a technical and business innovation. A means a specific innovation. It's strange to say that. Let's start that again. He became the leader of technical and business innovation. Meanwhile, he was one of the richest and best-known people in the world. Ford left most of his vast wealth to the Ford Foundation, set up for charity, such as donating to hospitals, etc. Elena. Of course, Henry Ford had a dark side, almost as black as the Model T. He was an anti-Semite. He bought a local newspaper, which was called the Dearborn Independent in 1918. Where would be a place? I think you want to say in which. That would work. He bought a local newspaper, which was called the Dearborn Independent in 1918, in which he published a number of anti-Semitic writings that were collected and published later as a 4-volume set called The International Jew, The World's Problem. It was in 1920. Even in Henry Ford's hospital, there was a policy barring Jews from the medical staff. In Germany, this book was translated and published by Theodor Fritsch, who was a founder of several anti-Semitic parties and a member of the Reichstag. Thereby, Hitler read this book and he said that he would. Thereby, Hitler had read this book and he said that he would do his best to put his theories into practice in Germany. Hitler regarded Ford as his inspiration. Because of this, he had Ford's life-size portrait next to his desk. Also, Ford is the only American mentioned in Hitler's book, Mein Kampf. At a ceremony in Dearborn, Michigan, Henry Ford is presented with the Grand Cross of the Supreme Order of the German Eagle on his 75th birthday. Henry Ford is the first American recipient of this. This is the highest honor Nazi Germany could give to any foreigner. Sabrina. As a super-rich and well-known person, Ford only had one marriage in his life. He was faithful to his wife and respected their relationship. He gave his family the sole ownership of his company and also arranged his family to have control of the Ford Foundation permanently. Elena. Edsel Ford was an able car guy. Edsel Ford, Henry's son. And Edsel Ford, Henry's only son, I think is more clear. So now, Elena. Edsel Ford, Henry's only son, was an able car guy who could have corrected the years of mismanagement by his father. He was nothing like his self-centered and autocratic father. He suffered years of bullying by his father, Henry. Many of Edsel's decisions were either overruled or nullified by his father. He was president of Ford. He, meaning Edsel. Let's be more clear here. Edsel was president of Ford in name only. Henry Ford refused to admit the truth about his son's condition. I'm not sure what you're referring to here. His condition? You didn't talk about it and suddenly you talk about it. What is the condition? It was all due to Edsel's high-flying lifestyle, he said. If Edsel would stop smoking or eat a proper diet or go see other doctors, his health would improve. Edsel had stomach cancer and he died when he was only 29. Aha, this is the condition you talked about earlier. Now I see. The story might have had a different ending if Edsel had been able to stand up to his stubborn father, demanding that he be allowed to run the company without interference. Sabrina. Ford created lots of opportunities to work with his franchise system and assembly line business model. For example, his franchise system put dealerships throughout most of North America, in major cities, on 6 continents, which created thousands of jobs. Elena. What also needs to be remembered is that the $5 a day had a dark side. In order to manage and control such a large and varied, not various, various workforces would mean many different workforces. A varied workforce means that the workforce had many different kinds of people. What also needs to be remembered is that the $5 a day had a dark side. In order to manage and control such a large and varied workforce, the head of personnel created the sociological department in 1914. This department was a system of rules and codes of behavior for Ford employees that they had to meet. At the beginning, it was 50 investigators who monitored employees at home, as well as on the job. They were like the CIA nowadays. Investigators made unannounced visits to employees' homes and evaluated the cleanliness of the home, noted if the family had renters, checked with school attendance offices to determine if children were attending school regularly, and monitored bank accounts to verify that employees made regular deposits. These people who assisted the workers' families by These people also okay. Sorry, I lost it. These people also assisted the workers' families by teaching the wives about home care, cooking, and hygiene. 1919. It was a year. It was the year. 1919. It was the year when Ford changed his sociological department into his soon-to-be notorious service department. This was the organization that ex-boxer and security chief Harry Bennett formed into a private army of thugs and gangsters to terrorize workers and prevent unionization in the 1930s. Ford's service department would grow to be the largest private police force in the world. Investigations were a prime reason workers wanted union protection, but Henry Ford was adamantly against labor unions, and he was the last automobile manufacturer to unionize his workforce. He thought they were too heavily influenced by some leaders who would end up doing more harm than good for the workers. And now, Barbara will do part 5 and introduce a new affordable electric vehicle. And then Barbara says, thank you, Sabrina and Elena. As we learned, Henry Ford built the first affordable car for the middle class using the assembly line. Nowadays, there are a few companies that are working in the on the next generation of cars. Electric vehicles. For example, General Motors, Tesla, Nissan, among others. The problem is that they are building luxurious electric cars. But if we think when Henry Ford started, he also worked in this type of cars. I'm not sure what you want to say. Henry Ford always bought an affordable car, but you want to say that he started with luxury cars? But if we think about Henry Ford when he started, he also worked in this type of cars. In this type. I'm not sure what you mean here. You mean luxury cars, electric cars? You lost me a little bit. Moving on. Why do we need cars? Because they are a reliable and easy mode of transportation. Getting from point A to B has never been easier. Years before, we had horses that helped us a lot with carrying and moving people and belongings. Today, the situation is different. We live in a world that some of us take it for granted. Okay. Today, the situation is different. How? Today, we live in a world in which that's someone of us, in which many people, today we live in a world today, okay, we already have today in the other sentence. So we live in a world in which many people, we live in a world that many people take for granted because we already have world. So we live in a world in which many people, we live in a world that many people take for granted. That's better. We live in a world that many people take for granted. And people buy things and then put it away. Put it away. Throw them away. And people buy a lot of things, briefly use them, and then they just throw them away. And people buy a lot of things, briefly use them, and then they just throw them away. This generates a lot of unnecessary waste. I believe we should think in a more sustainable way. That means we should care about the interaction between our environment, our economy, and our community. One way to achieve this is by investing in an electric car. Why is an electric car more convenient? Because an EV, or electric vehicle, has the following positive features. Please see our Glogster picture. Amount of pollution. EVs generate 80% less carbon dioxide. Fueling cost. You will spend more on your electricity bill, but the saving on gas will cover that. For example, if you drive a pure battery EV, 15,000 miles a year, you will pay about $500 per year for the electricity to charge your car's battery. But you will save about $1,900 in gas. So that means you will save about $1,900 in gas, resulting in $1,400 in savings. What is the problem with EVs right now? What is the problem with electric vehicles right now? The problem is the price. The range goes from $70,000 up to $1 billion. For instance, the Tesla Model X is a luxury EV and it costs around $135,000. Note the Glogster picture. However, as Ford thought once about how to build an affordable car for the middle class because it is a huge target, Tesla company is investing in a new prototype called Model 3 to try to lower the price of e-cars. But is it really affordable for you to pay $35,000 for a car? If you think so, you can make a pre-order payment next month, the end of March 2016. and the mass production of the Model 3 is going to be ready in 2017. To conclude, now it's Barbara talking to Barbara, so she's concluding, so she doesn't need to introduce herself. To conclude, Henry Ford, as any other wealthy and well-known man, has two ways Henry Ford, as with any other wealthy and well-known person, not only a man, right, can be remembered in two ways. On the one hand, he hired and paid the same salary to white and African American whites and African Americans. He made positive changes in work rules. And in order to lower car prices, he installed the first assembly line and as a result, beginning mass production. On the other hand, he hated Jews, admitted Hitler. Admitted? Doesn't make sense. Admired. I'm pretty sure you meant admired. On the other hand, he hated Jews, admired Adolf Hitler, and he was against labor unions, union laborers. Labor unions. However, for good or bad, Henry Ford changed the face of the U.S. Finally, in a near future, not in a near future, in the near future, finally, in the near future, we might get an affordable electric car, and we will help to build a sustainable Earth.